9. Martine had never been in Hep Hall before. She had never been in any of the string of workaday towns that meandered, one into the next, through this scarred, tired county. The Buckle of the Bible Belt was a title claimed by the oddly proud burghers of many a hick town in the American South, with their mega-churches and their huge houses for wholesome blonde families of 9, perfect smiles and terrible clothes. Martine knew that. She'd become somewhat obsessed by the South a few years back, before the genealogy. She had wondered for a while if he maybe wasn't a Londoner at all, but American. And in her ignorance, she thought all the black people in America lived down there, in the humid shade of those raggedy trees she couldn't name. So she'd watched documentaries and reality shows, expecting Gone with the Wind and Alice Walker, finding mega-churches instead. That one phrase had stuck, the buckle on the Bible Belt. She remembered it now, driving through West Lothian. The buckle on the Central Belt, she said to herself. Ingliston, Livingston, towns that could have been anywhere. Newbridge and Avonbridge, English-sounding somehow. Dechmont and Pumpherston, exotic in name, drab in reality. Then 3 towns all named Calder, East, Mid and West, as if even the town planners couldn't be bothered. And now Hep Hall. Martine caught sight of the sign announcing it, or she wouldn't have known she had left the last town behind. There were no outskirts, no suburbs, certainly no fields between one and the next. Just this endless road, with shops and flats, cheek by jowl, then depots and garages, spread out in space unwanted for anything else, the odd pub with a car park, and maybe a skittle alley tacked on, as the speed limit rose to 40. Then there'd be a proud sign, announcing twin towns and claims to fame, and the speed would go back down to 30, the traffic lights for pedestrian crossings would start up, and the garages and depots would give way to strings of shops again. Hep Hall was no different from all the rest of them. Cheap clothes shops and charity shops, because sometimes new clothes couldn't get cheap enough. Bakers and butchers with names picked out in gold on painted backgrounds. Burger, kebab, and pizza joints with plastic sheeting bolted over the original shop fronts. Pub after pub after pub. Closed phone shops and computer repair. Remnants of short-lived hopes. Open nail bars and tanning salons. Current hopes still afloat, but always with signs saying, walk-ins welcome. Martine's sat-nav showed the red pin worryingly close. Kate had said she'd loved their house, but she hadn't said anything about the area, and 1A Loch Road looked to be just off this straggling high street of newsagents and savour stores. Martine indicated, turned, and began peering out of the passenger window for her first glimpse of the place. Your destination is on the right, the sat-nav told her. She pulled in and parked by an iron gate between hedges, thinking, here goes. She had seen endless photographs now since that night at the family forest when her life changed. She'd seen faded snaps of a young man in his 20s, bell-bottom trousers and a striped V-neck t-shirt. He wore sunglasses and beamed out of the picture. Martine tried to see her face in his, her smile, her nose, her chin. But the original was overexposed from the start and had faded over the years. The flash on Kate's phone doing the rest of the work of hiding him. There were more. He was there in the back row of a school photo, with a thick black ring round his face that had smeared until it nearly obscured him. He was there at a party with a crowd of drunk friends, all of them with open shirts and shiny faces. Useless, Martine thought. He didn't even look like the same person in all these photos, and in the one of him with 2 little white girls, she would never have said either was Kate. She shouldered her messenger bag, gripped her overnight bag, and let herself in at the gate. The garden was long and uncared for, scrubby old trees standing in tussocky grass, and a long straight path that led to a wooden door, its varnish starting to lift and flake. Martine was sensitive to disorder. Who wouldn't be after her childhood? Between the chipped veneer and thin carpets in her grand's flat, clean enough, but worn through long before Martine arrived on the scene, and the smeared chaos of her mum's place. Greasy dust on every ledge and stains on the wall above the open bin where lobbed tea bags had missed. An endless line of black bags outside the front door, waiting for the day that never came, when someone would take them away. Martine sometimes thought that, even more than her new car and her good job, her bank balance and her credit rating, the solid ground in her life was the gleam on her polished taps, the Hoover swipes in the thick, pale nap of her whole house carpet, the sparkle of her windows, washed every month inside and out, reflecting her headlights in an unbroken streak of pure shine without a single fingerprint whenever she came home after dark. Sometimes she wondered if dogs' noses and children's hands messing up her perfect windows would have been nice too. Then she stepped inside, threw her keys in the bowl, hung her coat on a hook and stepped out of her court shoes, breathing in lemon polish and hearing nothing but the soft surge as her heating came on. Whatever lay behind this peeling door was something quite different. She knew that before it opened and Kate peered round it, beaming at her. "Come in," she said. "You made it. Is that your car at the gate? The navy blue one? Lovely. We can move it round later, can't we? It's fine for now. Come in, come in." She pressed Martine into a hug, and Martine hugged back, guessing from the slightly vinegary scent coming off the shorter woman's hair that she was nervous enough to be sweating. Again, Kate was dressed in clothes far too old for her actual age. A cardigan on top of a round-collared blouse, with a pleated skirt and pale tights. She had tartan slippers on and Kirby grips holding her hair off her face. Martine was touched to see all this evidence of intimacy. She was family. Kate's bare face and tea towel over the shoulder seemed to say, no need to be putting on airs and graces. "How do you like our fairytale cottage?" she said. "I'm in the scullery. Come and keep me company. But do you need... how long was your drive?" "I'm fine," Martine said, "because the gentleman's cloakroom is through the card room there." "The what?" "And the powder room is off the ladies' withdrawing room at the back." "The... what?" Martine looked at the closed doors leading off the wood-panelled hallway and then back at Kate, frowning, but with a smile too, that smile that was her core policy, her best defence. "It's a ballroom," said Kate. "The doctor's ballroom. Georgian, you'll see. If you care about architecture or interiors at all. See, this is the ballroom itself, through here." Martine left her bags in the hall and followed. "And this is the supper room." Kate's slippered feet thumped softly on the patterned wood floors. Martine followed her silently, her flat crepe soles not even squeaking. "Let's have a toast." There was a tray already set out, 3 glasses and an open bottle of something fizzy. Martine took a glass and clinked it against Kate's. She took a polite sip. It wasn't flat, as she'd expected from it sitting there open, but it wasn't good. "The scullery is our kitchen," Kate said, making her way through a frosted glass door in one corner. Martine followed. It was a long, narrow space, stone-floored and brick-walled, surely an offshoot from the main building. There was a dull metal box on legs with brass taps sticking out over it, a sink, apparently. Martine gave it a close look, wondering if it was lead and if the dishes washed in it were safe. Besides the sink, the kitchen consisted of wooden boards with shelves below and hooks above. In the far corner, a 2-ring hot plate sat beside a little bar fridge. The flex they were plugged into snaked across the few feet of floor to where it was fed through under the propped open sash of a barred window next to an outside door, the gap stuffed all around with rags. Kate went back to the task Martine had interrupted, stirring a pot so broad it stretched over both rings of the hot plate and so tall she had to reach up over the side. "What are you making?" Martine said. She was sure that pot was aluminium. Did people really still use aluminium pots to cook in? "Stovies," said Kate. But I remembered you're a vegetarian," she added, cutting in. "So it's just potatoes and onion and Marmite for a bit of flavour." She balanced her wooden spoon on the edge of the pot and turned back to face Martine again. "It really is lovely to have you here. You're the answer to my prayers." Martine smiled at the start of this speech, then found her face falling sombre again as she repeated the end of it to herself. "You mean finding me?" she said. "After you'd found out I existed, and all the time looking." Kate took the tea towel from over her shoulder and folded it carefully in half, then half again, and again. She kept folding until the cloth was a fat roll that wouldn't fold any more. "Yes," she said. "Exactly." "Is Gail coming?" Martine asked. "She's here." Martine looked over her shoulder towards the rest of the house. What had Kate called those other rooms on the far side of the hall? And why hadn't Gail come to greet her? "She's downstairs," Kate said. "She'll be up soon, or I could get her up now." Martine shifted her feet. "Don't disturb her if she's busy. Do they live down there?" Kate hesitated. "Gail and Leo." She hadn't heard another word about Leo since the fact that he took the tiny cassette to work and went away discreetly while the sisters listened to the message. Maybe that meant he'd give them space today. "There's no one living down there," Kate said. Martine looked towards the floor, at the stone slabs that were worn slightly concave in front of the wooden counters, from generations of feet shuffling and scraping as women stood there. "Do you work down there? You said you run a business, but you didn't say what it was, did you?" "Tech support," Kate said. Martine couldn't understand why those 2 words, or the combination of the words and the look on Kate's face, should trouble her. Kate lifted a broom from where it was hooked on 2 nails on the back of the door and banged it on the stone in 3 raps, hard enough to jolt Martine out of her thoughts again. Kate cocked her head. "She's on her way." Martine had heard nothing. "Thank you," she said. "I'm dying to meet her and talk. We've got so much to say, the 3 of us, haven't we? Well, the 2 of you. I'm dying to hear all your memories of him, Martin, your father, our father." She gave a breathless little laugh. "I don't know what to call him. What would you like me to call him?" "Dad," said Kate. "If you like, or anything you want to, but I would just say, maybe when Gail's here, don't talk too much about dying." "Dying?" Martine said. "Martin, dying? Of course not." "You, me, anyone," said Kate. "Dying to meet, dying to talk. You'll see." Martine could feel the word sorry starting to form, but she bit her lip on it. That was bonkers. In fact, everything about this place was just slightly... What was the word she was reaching for? Dying was only an expression. She took another drink to help the awkward moment by. On the other hand, she could remember what new grief felt like from when her gran died, how unreasonable it could make you. And besides, she should be grateful for Bonkers, an interesting family. A quirky home was cause for celebration. She had spun so many tales to herself about her dad. The African student, the deep south preacher's son. He had become a preacher's son over the years, somehow. The London lad with all the sisters. That she had sometimes thought the truth would be a disappointment. Hardly. She smiled at Kate, at the tall pot of stovies with the spoon balanced on top, at the weird, slummy kitchen. This place and her 2 adoptive sisters were anything but dull. She held the glass up in a sort of toast to that thought as she drank again. "Here she comes," Kate said again. Martine still couldn't hear anything. This stone-floored room with its bare brick walls was like a tomb around her. The first she knew was the snick of the latch on the outside door and the creak of the hinge as it swung open, letting in a gust of cold and making her shiver. She took a step back. She could even feel a catch in her throat, as if she was going to let out a cry, but she managed to hold on to it. Framed in the doorway was a woman a head and a half taller than Kate, and broad across the shoulders. She was dressed in a long, purplish-grey tunic that hung to her ankles, and her feet were bare, her toes red and white in patches from the cold. As she stepped inside, she left wet footprints on the stone flags. But it wasn't the strange dress or the bare feet that had set Martine's pulse rattling. It was the veil. The woman wore a veil of thin grey gauze dropped over her head and falling beyond her shoulders all around. "Hello," Martine said, with a quick darting look to Kate, whose face was unreadable. "You must be Gail. I'm Martine. I've been so very much looking forward to meeting you." She held out her hand to shake. "Shh," the woman said. So quietly, Martine might have believed she'd imagined it if she hadn't seen the veil moving. Gail's right hand stayed by her side, holding something Martine couldn't quite see hidden in the palm. Probably a phone, she thought. That was probably the curve of a metallic phone cover. "Look, darling," Kate said. "Look who's here." Gail shook her head. "Shh," she said. "Go and sit down, darling," said Kate. "I'll bring a plate of food for you." Gail shook her head again, and there was a twist to her mouth this time. "No," she whispered. "You have to stop." Then she turned and left, gliding silently on her cold, bare feet. The wet prints ran out before she stepped onto the patterned wood of the dining room, Martine wanted to say, although that wasn't what Kate had called it. "Is she okay?" Martine whispered, once she judged the woman was out of earshot. "She's fine. She's just having trouble with feelings of grief. Natural enough. She's better every day, and you being here will help no end." Martine nodded. She hadn't traipsed around a garden in bare feet or covered herself with a veil when her gran died, but she remembered those early nights when sleep felt 1,000 miles away. If someone had been there to see her, they might have found her as odd as she found Gail. And she's having trouble eating, is she? Upset at you for trying to make her? That can't be easy. It explained the huge pot of potatoes and onions, she reckoned. If it was Gail's favourite food, maybe, or if she wasn't going to eat anyway and Kate was sick of thinking up nice meals just to see them wasted. "She's fine," Kate said again. Martine saw a fleck of spit hitting the surface of the pan and noticed a tendon standing out on Kate's neck. "Are you okay?" she said. "I am fine, more than fine," Kate said. "Go and talk to her. She needs you. I'm fine. She's the one who needs you here." Martine stared at Kate's neck, at the pulse visibly pounding. She couldn't walk away from this much distress. But what could she say to help? Can't Leo help her? Was what she went for. Or has her doctor seen her? Leo? It was a howl. Yes, I didn't I? Leo. A man with a job. I said Leo. Like I said auntie. Like I said cat. She was stabbing her spoon into the pot as if to kill something lurking in there. Okay, Martine said, like she would to an animal injured and snarling. Like she had once to a drunk with a broken bottleneck in his hand. Slowly she backed away and, as light on her toes as she could be, she flitted to the hallway, to the place where she'd left her bags, her overnight, her messenger, her keys and her phone. And she stopped dead, feeling a whimper grow in her throat. They were gone. For one moment, just one, she saw herself opening the front door and running down the path, leaving her bags behind her. She could go to the newsagent's over the road or the nail bar on the corner and say, "What?" The whimper turned into a groan, and from behind the half-open door across the hall she heard Gail again. Shh. Relief flooded her, annoyance at its back. She tapped and then entered a pretty blue and white panelled room, empty like the rest of the house, except for a couple of chaise longues. Gail had lain down on one and was leaning back, lifting her feet. They were filthy, Martine noticed, with lines of mud between the toes and bits of grass stuck to the insteps. And the hem of her dress was muddy too, clinging round her ankles. It was thin material, almost transparent, and the underneath layer looked like silk. She still held the phone in one hand and was clutching a little leather case with a gold clasp in the other. "Gail," she said. "Shh. Gail, have you put my bag somewhere out of the way?" "Shh. Look." The annoyance was growing, but she tried to keep her voice gentle. "Look, I'm sorry for what you're going through, and obviously it was far too soon for me to turn up here, so if you'll just tell me where my bags are, I'll—" "Don't shush me again. I know you're grieving, but—" "Grief," said Gail at last, in a stronger voice than Martine had heard from her, "is the last act of love." "That's right," Martine said. "Someone once told me grief is the bill we pay for the love we knew." "Tell her!" Gail had turned her head and was facing Martine full on now. She pointed with the hand holding the phone. Was it a phone? Her chest was lifting and falling rapidly, and the gauze in front of her face was fluttering with each snatched breath. "Is that why you're wearing a veil?" Martine said. "Is it mourning?" "I'm not wearing a veil," Gail said. Her voice had risen with her quickening breath and was as high as birdsong now. "The veil is between us, before your eyes." "Oh, darling, don't say that." Kate's voice came from the doorway, a sudden wail in the silence. "She's hidden my bags," Martine said. "Shh," said Gail. Kate had a shallow plate of food in each hand, steam curling off them in the cold air as she advanced into the room. "I've brought you something to eat, my darling." Gail pressed herself back into the chaise and raised both hands in front of her. Now Martine could see that the little rounded object wasn't a phone after all. It was a knife. One of those old craft knives, probably illegal now. What were they called? Stanley knives. As Kate took one more step, Gail's thumb moved and the blade slid out with a sharp tick. As silently as she could, Martine set her glass on the floor and got to her feet. Kate bent over the chaise with her neck stretched, inches from the glinting blade. "Stop it," she said. "We both know that's not for me." The plates had tipped and thin streams of liquid were pouring onto the floor, chunks of potato thudding down and splashing in the puddles. Martine felt her stomach rise as she edged towards the door. Talk. The blade flashed as it slid back inside the handle. "Look," Kate whispered. Her voice was coiling and gentle, but as she swung her hand towards Martine, an arc of hot liquid sprayed over the floor, catching the front of Martine's legs. "Look." Kate's face was inches from Gail's now. "She's right there. She's right here. I brought her for you, just like—" Tick. Martine stood frozen for one long, empty moment, looking between the two of them. Gail stark-eyed behind the veil, and Kate yearning forward, as if to peck holes in the air in front of her face. Then she turned and fled, her crepe soles squeaking on the hall floor. She lunged for the front door handle, fumbling and twisting it this way and that until she couldn't deny it. "Did you lock this?" she shouted. "Am I locked in here?" "Just till you settle," said Kate. "I'll move your car round and you stay here with my sister. She needs you. You're exactly what she needs." Martine went racing through the house to the kitchen to twist and rattle the door handle there. She shouted and pounded on the solid panels. She took a pan from a shelf and threw it at the window. It smashed the glass, but bounced back off the bars. As she fell back against the wall and let herself slide down to squat on the floor, she could hear the thump, thump, thump of Kate's slippers and the slap, slap, slap of Gail's bare feet, and very faintly the tick-tock, tick-tock of the knife blade going in and out in time as they approached her. 10. The trouble with most people was that they didn't sculpt their lives. Oprah had said that, used just that word, and the sound of it in her smoke and honey voice, "Sculpt your life," had made Laura shiver with a delight sharp enough to feel indecent. It wasn't the sort of thrill you should feel all alone in your own living room watching daytime telly with the curtains drawn over. It was like when your hairdresser suddenly started massaging your scalp in the middle of an ordinary hair washing, as if giving that much pleasure, enough to lift all the hairs on your arms and wring a groan from your throat, was the sort of thing that happened any day of the week. And it was everywhere. Even food adverts that followed the glossy swirl of chocolate sauce round the meek white mounds of ice cream in a way that made her think of ice dancers, swooping and whirling, speeding up in tighter and tighter spins, then bursting free into a long, low, lazy loop again, still panting. She couldn't watch it, couldn't watch any of it, couldn't look at herself in the mirror after. Laura didn't like to lose control. She liked to plan. People didn't plan. Well, not in detail, anyway. They dreamed. They hoped, long after they should know better. But they didn't plan. Laura planned. She wanted a baby, just one, and a house. She saw it so clearly she could have drawn a blueprint. And she wanted a business, with no fewer than 3 employees and no more than 6, in a modern building with a car park and a reception desk. So, first, she needed a man. That was exactly the sort of clear sight most women she knew would shy away from. They'd tell themselves they'd do it alone. They were goddesses and wonderful, and then, when it was wine o'clock, they'd admit it wasn't working, and they were beginning to think it never would. Laura was different. She knew if she concentrated on getting the man and then pegging him down with the baby, he'd be on the hook for her business plan, whether he stayed with her and called it love, or moved on and called it alimony. She didn't mind which. She didn't mind which man either. So long as he was tall, with good hair and all his teeth, and earned a decent 6 figures, she could cope with just about anything. And she knew how to snag him too. It was mostly diet and exercise. Even if they were canny enough not to say it out loud anymore, at least in mixed company, every man wanted a fit body. She knew plenty girls who spent a fortune at the hairdressers and the beauty parlour, even the perfume counter. The clueless fools, when the fact was that 99 men out of 100 couldn't tell the difference between a 500 smacker highlight job and a packet from the chemist. As long as your hair was long and clean, and you didn't mind him holding it like a rope, it was all the same. And none of them liked that caked-on look with the boxy eyebrows and 10 tones of shading. Never mind the thought of kissing wet-look glossed lips. She laughed up her sleeve at them all on a Saturday night. Circus clowns. They were out on the pool, and they might as well be wearing signs on their heads telling men to stay away. The perfume was worst of all. They came home from Magaluf, laden with duty-free, loving themselves for it. And even that one man in 100 who cared about hairdos and didn't mind bronzer, even he couldn't stomach the guff of them. They were like gardens sprayed with cat repellent, telling themselves the cats would be rolling up any minute now. Laura had long blonde hair she washed every day and left loose. She wore no makeup at all, ever, as far as any man would know. And she smelled of Pear's soap and baby powder. She wore heels she could walk in, jeans that fitted her with no rolls bursting over the top, and the best push-up padded bra she could afford under a low top with a pendant necklace that gave them an excuse for looking. And they did look. Then they looked up, cowering with guilt, ready for a frosty stare or even a rude word. But she kept on listening to whatever they were banging on about with exactly the same happy smile on her face, as if she hadn't noticed. If she'd smirked at them, making out she didn't mind, they'd have backed off. No one wanted a slapper who wore a low top and loved it when men looked down her cleavage. But a sweet, fresh-faced girl who smelled like their wee sister after bath time and didn't even know when men were taking liberties, probably didn't realise how low the neckline was, or even how perfect the rack was. That was the sort of girl who needed someone to look after her. Not that she seemed to be searching. She was always happy to hear of an engagement, hen night, wedding, even baby shower. She was delighted at the news and thrilled to be included. She loved her job, as far as anyone could tell. She'd drop it if a city break came up. But she was just as happy to suit herself for 3 weekends in a row if the man of the moment got a better offer. She was a good driver and kept her car immaculate, but she handed over the keys automatically and let herself be driven without a murmur. She liked to drink, but she never got plastered, never got sloppy. She was great in bed. She knew it and wasn't ashamed to congratulate herself. She was absolutely bloody great. Responsive and willing, no matter what they asked her to do, but she never pushed it. Never asked them for anything they hadn't at least hinted at already. And this was her secret weapon. This was what set her above all the other women she knew and all the other women she heard men moaning about. She didn't want to talk about it afterwards. She didn't want to talk about anything. She didn't talk. Laura Wade, in short, was the perfect woman. She was 40 years old too, which was the perfect age to attract a man who wanted to settle down. "You're the perfect age," she told herself out loud in the bathroom mirror on her birthday. It was less intimidating for a man of the right age, which was 45, to ask her out. He didn't need to worry about music and late nights. He knew she'd understand that he had responsibilities at work and friends he wanted to spend time with. So, why was the memory thudding so solidly in her mind of when she'd been looking at herself in this mirror and telling herself she was 30 now and needed to get a move on because if he didn't turn up soon, she might as well call it a bust and shift to Plan B. Not that she actually had a Plan B. She didn't have time between all the different tentacles of her budding business empire. "I'm a content designer," she'd say on first dates. Normal men didn't want to hear any more than that. They looked at her posh watch and her posh car and drew the conclusion that whatever content she designed, she did it well enough. She never talked about it again, unless they asked, and they never asked. The truth was that she wrote greetings cards, 200 quid a poem and 50 for a one-liner. Gal pals and wine was her speciality, but she could knock out an exhausted new parent or a second chance at love, often enough to keep her options open. She'd stolen the idea of writing messages in sand from somewhere or other too, and that was a sweet little sideline, but it took half a day, and only when the weather was good. Selling phone cases online was her bread and butter. She designed them herself, so she wasn't lying, but it was retail. Not that she had anything against retail. She kept trying to move into dog accessories where the big money was, but she'd been stung. "Sand to Arabs and snow to Eskimos," she told herself in the mirror each morning. She had offloaded the 6 boxes of dog coats to a market trader, cutting her losses, and rarely thought about them these days. At least she wasn't doing carpets anymore. She hadn't got rid of her steam cleaner. It sat there, taped up in black plastic in the back corner of the garage, just in case. When she parked the S-Class, she looked at it the way you'd look at the handrail in a hotel bathroom, thinking, never, and hoping it was true. All in all, Laura was the last person to go forking over her hard-earned and hoarded cash to buy services from anyone else. She washed her own car and her own windows. She cut her own fringe and did her own ironing. She'd designed her own website and made her own windscreen flyers. But something had tipped her over the edge on this one. Match, eHarmony, and Elite Singles between them hadn't coughed up anything worth a second date in the 6 months since she'd offloaded Gareth. He had seemed promising at first. Early on, she'd made sure to get a squint at his bank statement, and she'd seen the monthly total of his child support. If that was how fatherhood took him, she thought, then she could put up with his split fingernails and kayaking anecdotes. Then, on the way back from a Valentine's weekend at a Highland hotel, he dropped the bombshell. No more kids. He was committed to the 2 that his marriage had produced, and he didn't want to be split between them and any more. "I'm guessing you'll be okay with that," he'd said. He couldn't look at her, not on that twisting country road in the near dark, but he must have picked up on her reaction somehow. "Laura?" he said after a minute. "I mean, you've never mentioned kids, and you're so—" "So what?" Laura said, the harshest words she'd ever spoken to him. No one likes a shrew. "So professional," he offered after a moment's thought. "Slick, not slick, polished, though." "Slick," she repeated to herself. "Slick." She broke up with him by text the next night. When that didn't bring him to her entry phone, promising to match the Waltons if she'd just buzz him up and let him apologise, she couriered his sad little collection of possessions round to him and blocked his number. There was no time to waste on no-hopers, she told herself, trying for upbeat. But the truth of it, the hourglass running out and that little fold in the corner of her mouth that didn't disappear these days even when she smiled, were like a dash of cold water. Which was where fairy tale endings came in. She'd stumbled on the website late one Saturday night when she'd watched herself awake again on a whole painfully slow series of Swedish murders. At 2:00, with a dull headache and gritty eyes, she'd searched dating, introductions, matchmaking and singles, clicking through the early pages she knew so well, until she was back in the weeds, hating herself for even looking, despising the clunky prose and ill-advised fonts of these homemade little websites. It hadn't been that long since she'd caught a virus from one of these crappy-looking sites. Such a bad one she couldn't get rid of it herself and had to cough up to a professional to do it for her. Laura hated being defeated and having to pay an expert to take over. Fairytale Endings was different. She knew a decent photograph when she saw one, and the picture on the home page of an elegant room with little tables laid for supper, candles and crystal both twinkling had not been snapped on an iPhone. "We are not a dating service," the blurb began. "We are not a singles service or an introduction portal. We are matchmakers, as matchmakers used to be. Our clients are gentlemen between the ages of 25 and 60 who desire to meet financially independent, educated, interesting ladies with a view to marriage." "In other words, you're a dating service," Laura said, but she closed the other windows on her laptop and got herself a refill of wine to read some more. "We host monthly dinner dances in an exclusive, private and safe location," the blurb went on. The sidebar photograph, black and white, was of a woman in a Hitchcock-era evening dress, perched on a stool, powdering her face in an ornate mirror. She held the powder puff in a hand, wearing a long, white evening glove, and Laura wished she hadn't thought of Hitchcock's heroines. The smear of face powder on the white glove was an anonymous dark grey, like Janet Leigh's blood in the shower. "You're drunk," she told herself. She snapped shut the laptop, poured away the wine, and swallowed half a pint of water and 2 ibuprofen before she went to bed. Maybe she dreamed about it. Laura rarely remembered her dreams. In any case, she found herself looking for the site again the next day. They had a menu posted: scallops, pigeon, rhubarb fool, and a list of dances they suggested an acquaintance with. Laura Googled social foxtrot, easy waltz, minuet. It was the minuet that undid her. Too many 6-part miniseries with men in breeches and women in muslin. She kept clicking and found the testimonials. They were discreet, no faces, no second names, but 2 of them were wedding photos. In one, a slim bride in a sheath of cream satin was walking under an honour guard with a tall groom whose bald spot shone as if the photographer had focused his lens on it deliberately. Laura felt her pulse quicken. That had to be real. If they'd been models, they'd have picked a man with a full head of hair. The other wedding photograph was from the neck down, 2 hands in brand new rings clasped over a white lace pregnancy bump, and the caption, "Only human." Laura laughed and scrolled on. The enrollment questions were generic enough. They wanted to know her age, salary range, marital status, and aspirations. "Marriage to a bachelor, divorcee, or widower," she wrote. "Must want children." She looked for another page where weight and height ranges might be hiding, where she could specify a flat stomach and a non-smoker, but there was nothing. Meat market, Laura told herself, or a cover for something. Maybe it was a swingers club and she was too green to decipher the code. But the 2 wedding photographs, bald, pregnant, wouldn't leave her. The next night, sitting with another glass of wine, she refilled the boxes and this time submitted the information. In the morning, there was an email in her inbox telling her, with regret, that they had a full complement of ladies for the next 2 monthly dances, but would she like them to keep her name on file for later in the spring? Laura bristled. wondering what troglodytes they were shoving at these gentlemen clients. If there was nowhere to describe your looks on the submission form, she didn't reply. Another day passed, and then an email came warning her that her data would be disposed of in 24 hours unless they received instructions to the contrary. "Please keep my information on file," she wrote back. She couldn't help adding an attachment. A photograph of herself standing outside a German Schloss, crisp and sunny in white trousers and ballet flats, with huge sunglasses and a scarf tied over her hair. Her bag, from the angle in the photo, looked just like a Birkin. Gareth had snapped that, and she knew it was tacky to use it, but they weren't to know, were they? Then she forgot about it. She was trying to decide whether to add earbuds and stands to her phone case line, or whether that would cheapen her brand. Her brand was all she had, and she would protect it, like a mother bear with her cubs. When the day came that she had a little shop in Glasgow and one in Edinburgh, a little concession here and there in the foyers of the best hotels. When she was thinking about London, one cheap set of earbuds with her name on them could drive off an entrepreneurial sponsor like a dose of anthrax. When the email came 2 months later, there was no spark of recognition in Laura. She swept it away to spam and carried on with her costings. It was only at lunchtime, standing in her kitchen, waiting for one of her tubs of frozen soup to finish thawing, that her mind wandered to men, dates, dancing, and then, as the microwave pinged, Laura's brain pinged with it. She pulled her phone close and fished the email back to her inbox. "Our May event is rose-themed," it began. "Please let us know your favourite colour of rose when you accept this invitation. Allergy sufferers, please alert us and we will make every attempt to ensure your comfort." It wasn't very informative, but as she stood puzzling at the lack of details, another email arrived. "Dear Laura, I'm delighted to announce that we have several gentlemen attending next month who are keen to meet a woman just like you. One, in particular, has been disappointed by the company at his monthly dances so far, and we have taken the liberty of forwarding your photograph to him in advance. He has requested your presence at his table for the 3rd rotation." Laura narrowed her eyes at that. 3rd sounded a bit indifferent. On the other hand, her experience with speed dating had shown her that the last of the night was often the one you pursued from sheer exhaustion. You were sitting opposite some guy when they finally stopped hitting that damn buzzer, and so you gave him a shot because it was either that or stand up again. Maybe 3rd rotation was to give this gentleman who'd seen her photo a decent chance. So she accepted. She composed a terse email saying she was free and would attend, but needed more information for her own peace of mind. The response came in 20 minutes, completely different in tone. Gushing, she might have said. "We can furnish you with any information you need on our gentlemen, except surnames. If you would be happier with a phone call, let me know when you are free and someone will ring you. For now, let me say that 7 of our 15 gentlemen attending in May are new to fairytale endings. The other 8 are returning gentlemen who have not yet found that special someone. You will dine with 3, moving between courses, and then are free to dance with anyone who asks. We have found that ladies prefer not to take responsibility for approaching dance partners, and our gentlemen know that dancing is expected of them." Nicely put, Laura thought. Reassuring. "Your 3 dining companions are as follows," the email went on. "Piers is 40 years old, a businessman from Glasgow. He is divorced without children and is looking for a companion who will cope well with his frequent long absences from home due to overseas travel." That was a possibility she hadn't considered yet. A man she could stay married to, avoiding all the hassle of a divorce, but who didn't get under her feet. He'd probably be guilty enough to invest in her business too, and he wouldn't resent her putting in the hours because he wouldn't be there. For the main course, you will join Robert. Robert moved to Scotland from his native Ghana as a postgraduate student and is now working in the tech industry. He is 35 years old and is a never-married singleton. His intention is to remain here indefinitely. In other words, he needed residency and thought a wife was the way to get it. That didn't necessarily put her off. There was money in tech, and weren't Ghanaians all 10 feet tall with perfect teeth and those sexy, breathy voices? She could learn to cope with a tall, gorgeous husband whose English wasn't good enough for arguments. Over dessert and coffee, and on into the evening if you choose to remain together, your companion will be Grant. Grant has attended 4 fairytale evenings in the last year and has enjoyed each one. He is an enthusiastic dancer and a true conversationalist, but he has not yet met the girl of his dreams. Grant is looking for a woman in her late 30s who is ready to settle down and is keen on a small family, but who is independent enough to steer her own ship while he concentrates on the expansion of his growing business. We showed Grant your photograph as an incentive for him to attend a further event after the recent disappointments, and he was favourably impressed. Grant, Laura said to herself. She was standing at her breakfast bar, charging her laptop before she took it to her study for a sprint. This was one of Laura's most productive little life hacks. She ran her laptop battery down while completing a task, demanding of herself that she finish it before recharging. Grant, she said, leaving the kitchen and padding through to the spare bedroom, the one she had turned into a wardrobe for herself. She never had people to stay, and she liked to see her clothes properly stored. Grant and Laura. She leafed through the cocktail dress section, wondering what Grant would like to see her in. She owned nothing black. You were already ahead of the pack if you walked into a party in a colour when all the other women had crapped out. She always took care to compliment them, of course, on their beautiful sequins or beading or chiffon or fringes, as if any of those token efforts made up for the acceptance of defeat that was the little black dress. Should she go sleeveless? Her arms were in perfect shape, but there was nothing to show on a second date if she went sleeveless on the first. Grant and Laura. What? Would she change her name? She had always thought Wade would make a good element in a double barrel. It would depend on his, she supposed. If he was called Foxworth or Montague, she would dump Wade like a poo bag. But if he was called McGuffin or Burke or something, she'd weigh up her options. Briefly, she wondered what the Ghanaian's second name would be and whether an exotic touch would be good for business. She plucked an emerald green dress off the rack. She'd send it to be dry cleaned before the dance. Not that she had put it away dirty, but the truth was she hadn't worn any of her cocktail dresses since a year past Christmas. Her last weekend away with Gareth, so it might have got stale. Somewhere in Laura's future, she firmly believed there was a real walk-in wardrobe waiting, cedar-lined and air-filtered. There would be lights under the shelves and round the mirror, and she wouldn't need to keep an exercise bike in it. She had a niggling little worry that she'd seen this wardrobe in a film and wasn't being realistic dreaming of it for her own future, but she batted the thought away. Even divorced Piers from Glasgow, dragging his failed starter marriage along behind him, couldn't object to his wife, his keeper wife, mother of his child, wanting some decent hanging space and a few shelves for her shoes. When she wrote back to fairytale endings, she didn't stand on her dignity. She loved the sound of Grant and was also very interested to speak to Robert, since she had never been to Africa. She was glad to have Piers as an icebreaker. Perhaps she was fulfilling that function for him too. In any case, she was looking forward in great anticipation to May and to what promised to be a rewarding experience, as well as a treat. It was concerning. Not so much as troubling, but certainly concerning that fairy tale endings didn't want her to talk about them on social media or share details with non-members. Discretion, they said, confidentiality, exclusivity. She could see the point of it. Piers, Robert and Grant didn't sound like the sort of men who would want their private lives plastered all over the internet. But still, it was concerning. Laura thought of what all the other dating sites advised. Tell someone where you're going. Meet on neutral territory. Go in the daytime the first time, not in the evening. But then there were going to be 30 people at this dance as well as the organisers. She was being too cautious. She had suffered so many sharp falls that she couldn't accept something pleasant coming easily to her and offering a smooth path. Besides, she wasn't talking to a strange man online, arranging to meet. She was talking to a professional woman like herself. Myra from Fairy Tale Endings. Laura had a good feeling about this one.